Your breath fogs before your face and you're still indoors. The fire's long gone, the ashes cold in the grate. A draught creeps in through the cracks in the walls, sharp as a blade. It snakes past your woolen socks, under your tunic, between your shoulder blades. You pull the blanket higher. It's scratchy. It stinks faintly of wet dog. And you're fairly certain someone else slept in it last night. Possibly 3 someone else's. Welcome to bedtime in a medieval castle. Forget turrets and tapestries. At night, this place is a stone box designed to trap the cold. No insulation, no glass in the windows, just wooden shutters rattling in the wind, and a few threadbare hangings on the wall pretending to be warmth. The stone floors radiate a chill so deep it could pickle fish. The bed creaks like an old ship. Ropes hold up a lumpy mattress, stuffed with straw that hasn't been changed in weeks, if ever. It smells earthy, but not in a good way. You shift, trying to find a position that doesn't jab your ribs with something twiggy. A flea hops onto your arm. You try not to think about it. Sleep doesn't come easy here. Not when the walls whistle. Not when you're sharing your bedchamber with your siblings, 2 servants, and a goat. Not when the darkness is thick enough to choke on, and the only thing between you and total exposure is a poorly latched door and a prayer to Saint Brigid. Still, you pull your nightcap over your ears and close your eyes. Maybe tonight the rats won't rustle in the rafters. Maybe the brazier's faint warmth will linger just long enough. Maybe, just maybe, you'll drift off before your feet go numb. Don't count on it. Castles look cozy in movies. Stone fireplaces, roaring flames, fur-draped beds, golden candlelight flickering on velvet walls. But that image is mostly a Hollywood fever dream with central heating off-screen. The reality? Stone doesn't warm, it holds cold like a grudge. And castles, for all their grandeur, were basically giant refrigerators with arrow slits. The higher the tower, the colder the air. The thicker the walls, the more they trapped moisture. Water seeped into everything. The wood, the bedding, the bones. In winter, the inside temperature of a castle could drop to near freezing and stay there. And those roaring hearths, not as common as you'd think. A few great halls had open fires. Yes, but most of the bedrooms, chambers, and passageways were fireless zones, especially for servants and lower-born residents. Fires were expensive to maintain, dangerous in enclosed wooden structures, and labor-intensive to manage. Wood had to be chopped, dried, hauled in, and constantly tended, and not everyone got the privilege of warmth. Windows, meanwhile, were holes in the wall covered with shutters, oiled cloth, or horn if you were lucky. Glass was so rare and expensive that only churches and royalty could afford it. Most slept with the shutters closed tight against the cold and wind, but that just sealed in the damp. The phrase, "a roof over your head," sounds comforting, unless it's a leaking one. Castle roofs were often thatch or stone tiles, held together with medieval guesswork. They dripped, they sagged, sometimes they collapsed. Even the nobles, with their fur cloaks and feather beds, spent their nights wrapped in multiple layers, huddled beneath canopies, to keep the drafts from slapping them awake. Servants slept in hallways, stables, or on straw pallets near doors. Privacy? A myth. Comfort? A luxury. Heat? An illusion. You weren't sleeping in a fortress. You were freezing in one. You might think the bed was your one refuge, a plush escape from the bitter chill. Think again. A medieval bed wasn't designed for comfort. It was a status symbol, a container for straw, and a playground for pests. Let's start with the structure. Thick wooden posts, a canopy above to block falling dust or thatch bits, and a frame laced with ropes. Those ropes had to be tightened regularly, hence the phrase, "sleep tight." But even when they were tight, they sagged. Your body dipped into the center like a spoon in porridge. and the ropes creaked with every breath. On top of this frame lay the mattress, usually a cloth sack, stuffed with straw, hay, or if you were very lucky, wool or feathers. But straw molds. It smells. It attracts insects. Mice loved it. So did bedbugs. The richer the material, the more it absorbed sweat and grime, and the less it got cleaned. Linen sheets were for the upper class. Everyone else dealt with coarse wool or went without. Blankets were heavy, scratchy, and rarely washed. You didn't change the sheets. You endured them. Pillows, if they existed, were hard, lumpy, and stuffed with whatever you had. Rags, dried grass, even sawdust. And then there was the size. Most medieval beds were short, not because people were drastically smaller, but because sleeping fully reclined was associated with death. The dead were laid flat. The living slept semi-upright, propped by bolsters, legs bent, like they were always ready to flee or prey. If you moved too much in your sleep, you'd wake up with a spider on your face. If you didn't move at all, you'd wake up numb. The bed didn't cradle you. It challenged you. And just when you'd finally doze off, the straw beneath you would shift and something unseen would skitter across your skin. Sleep tight indeed. In the medieval world, sleep wasn't a peaceful escape. It was a fragmented ritual, tangled in superstition, strategy, and sheer physical endurance. First, you didn't sleep in one long stretch. Most people followed the two-sleep pattern. First sleep began after sundown, lasting a few hours. Then came a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night used for prayer, sex, stoking the fire, or checking livestock before second sleep carried you through to dawn. It wasn't insomnia. It was expected. And you didn't sleep alone. Most people shared beds, not just with family, but with servants, guests, apprentices or strangers. Travellers at inns often shared a mattress with whoever was next in line. In some manors, even nobles slept communally when travelling. The bed wasn't private. It was practical. You didn't need trust, just warmth. You also wore layers to bed, not because it was cozy, but because stripping down was risky. If you had to flee from raiders, fires, or drunken brawls, better to be already dressed. A tunic, stockings, maybe a cloak if you were lucky. Nightshirts existed, but they doubled as undergarments. And under that, possibly nothing, because laundry was expensive, and changing too often was a luxury. Then there were the fears. Demons, thieves, rats, fires, drafts. You didn't just go to bed. You armed yourself with ritual. You crossed yourself. You checked your lock if you had one. You placed iron under the bed to ward off spirits. Some households lit blessed candles. Others stuffed herbs in their pillows to repel evil or infection. And fires? They were as likely to kill you as keep you warm. Open flames, straw floors, woolen bedding one misstep, and the whole household could go up like a tinderbox. Many slept in total darkness rather than risk a night candle tipping over. Sleep wasn't just about rest. It was about strategy against cold, against chaos, against the dark, because in the medieval night, the world didn't sleep peacefully. It held its breath. If you're picturing a roaring hearth beside every bed, casting cozy shadows on stone walls, stop. Most medieval sleepers never saw a flame after sundown. Fire was precious. Fire was dangerous. And fire, above all, was not for comfort. Great halls sometimes had vast central hearths with smoke curling up through holes in the roof or a rudimentary chimney. These fires were for cooking, lighting, or heating the main gathering space. But at night, the flames were banked or smothered to preserve embers. Fuel was expensive, and firewood didn't chop itself. As for bedrooms, forget it. Heating individual rooms was a fantasy. Even nobles rarely enjoyed a private fireplace, and if they did, it was more for appearances than actual warmth. Stone walls suck in the heat like a sponge, and then bleed cold back into the room all night long. Instead, people relied on braziers, small metal pans filled with glowing coals, but they were finicky and dangerous. One wrong bump, and you'd set the place alight. Others used hot stones wrapped in cloth, slid beneath mattresses, or placed at the foot of the bed to delay frostbite. They helped for an hour or two. Then they cooled, and you were left with cold toes and a rock in your sheets. Servants and peasants had even fewer options. Their heating was usually body heat, huddled close like livestock. In some places, the kitchen hearth provided residual warmth to the sleeping quarters, which were often just corners on the same floor. And let's not forget the smell. Without ventilation, smoke from even a small brazier could cling to your skin, hair, and lungs. There's a reason medieval interiors were dark, grimy, and full of coughing. The truth is, the fire that warmed your evening stew was rarely the one that warmed your bones. At night, warmth became a memory, something you chased in your dreams but never found beneath the blankets. If you're lucky enough to find a bed in medieval Europe, you won't have it to yourself. The idea of a private bed is laughably modern. In castles, inns, cottages, even monasteries' beds were shared, always, with siblings, parents, servants, guests, or even total strangers. Not because people were friendly, because people were cold. Sharing body heat was a survival tactic, not a bonding experience. In noble households, a bed could sleep 5 or more. The lord, his lady, a maid or two, maybe a page boy curled at the foot. Some beds were massive, wide enough to hold a small council meeting, but others were cramped and overcrowded. There was no my side of the bed, only elbows and knees and snoring mouths far too close. Inns were worse. You'd rent a space in a bed, not the whole thing. Travellers would be paired up. Man, woman, didn't matter. You slept with whoever arrived before or after you. There are records of wealthy travellers buying out entire beds, just to avoid sharing with peasants or pickpockets, but most couldn't afford that luxury. If the inn was full, the floor would do. Then there were the pests. Fleas and lice didn't care about class. The more people in a bed, the better the buffet. Mattresses, blankets and clothes were rarely washed. Linen sheets might be aired out in summer, but vermin were constant companions. If someone scratched all night, you didn't ask questions. You scratched too. Parents often shared beds with infants, leading to tragic accidents. Children suffocated, wet the bed, cried through the night, but there was nowhere else to put them. Cribs were rare. Nurseries, a royal privilege. And yet, in this closeness, there was something grimly communal. The bed wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a hearth, a shelter, a microcosm of medieval life. Cramped, noisy, uncomfortable, but necessary. Because in a world without warmth, proximity was protection, even if it came with snoring, lice, and someone else's breath in your face. In a medieval castle, changing into pajamas meant absolutely nothing, because what you wore to bed was usually what you wore all day. Sweat, soot, and all. Bathing was rare. Laundry was rarer. And warm water? Practically a luxury item. So, unless you were royalty or freshly dunked by your monastery's strict hygiene schedule, you likely slept in your tunic, your hose, and whatever cloak or shift you'd been trudging around in for the last week. There were, of course, nightshirts, long, loose garments made of linen or wool, but these were mostly for the wealthy, who had multiple changes of clothing and someone else to wash them. For peasants and servants, the best you could hope for was stripping down to your undertunic. Fully undressing, risky, cold, immodest, and frankly, unnecessary. Nightcaps weren't just fashion, they were insulation. Heat escapes through the head, and medieval castles had a gift for turning ears to icicles. A snug, woolen cap helped retain body warmth. Sometimes socks or even gloves were added, if you had them. You looked ridiculous. You stayed alive. As for undergarments, depends on the class and the decade. Men might wear brays, loose medieval boxers, while women had shifts or chemises. But underwear wasn't the norm for everyone, and it certainly wasn't changed daily. The average medieval sleeper simply added layers, or curled up with a blanket that doubled as outerwear by day. And if you were menstruating, you got creative. Rags, moss, wool, whatever was absorbent and reusable. No privacy, no plumbing, just endurance beneath 10 pounds of fabric. The idea of slipping into crisp, clean sheets in fresh pajamas would have been laughable or magical. Most people lay down in what they had, smeared in the day's labour, and tried not to think about the last time the mattress had seen sunlight. So the next time you grumble about scratchy flannel pajamas or threadbare sheets, remember, medieval sleepers didn't wind down in comfort. They collapsed in whatever they hadn't frozen in yet. Sleep in a medieval castle wasn't just a fight against cold. It was a dance with mortality. In many keeps, the dead weren't far. Some castles were built atop old crypts or ancestral burial grounds. Chapels doubled as tombs. Bedrooms shared walls with family shrines or relic closets. Stone slabs below your bed might conceal generations of long-dead nobles, entombed within the very foundations. For ordinary people, death seeped into the nightly routine. Children died young, plague visited without warning, winter claimed the elderly in their sleep. So when you laid down at night, it was with the quiet knowledge that not everyone would rise with the Sunday. There were deathbeds, literal designated beds for the dying. In wealthier households, the master's bed might double as a place to issue final commands, last wills, and confessions. Curtains were drawn, candles lit, prayers whispered. The room and the mattress were soaked in ritual. But you didn't have to be dying to feel haunted. People spoke of night air, bringing illness, the miasma that drifted in during the hours of darkness. To breathe too deeply was to invite disease. Windows stayed closed. Fires were snuffed. You slept with a cloth over your face, not for modesty, but for survival. Dreams themselves weren't trusted. They were warnings, messages, omens. A crying infant in a dream might signal famine. A dark rider, war. Dreams of teeth, death in the family. And because the church taught that Satan could whisper into your sleeping mind, some went to bed, clutching a crucifix, terrified of what visions might come. Plague blankets once used to cover the sick were reused out of necessity. They moved from body to body, from sickbed to shared mattress, carrying both warmth and risk. In times of scarcity, there was no other choice. So yes, people slept, but they slept lightly, superstitiously, sandwiched between the living and the dead, wrapped in cloth and prayer. In the silence of a medieval night, every creak of timber or flutter of shadow might be a ghost or just a draft. You hoped it was a draft. Of course, not everyone froze like a salted herring. If you were royalty, or at least wealthy enough to own a fork, you might have gotten a slightly warmer deal. Nobles had access to luxuries the average peasant could only dream of, starting with the bed itself. A true noble's bed was massive, carved from heavy oak, and raised off the floor like a throne. Thick feather mattresses replaced straw. Curtains were drawn around all four sides, not for privacy, but for insulation. Velvet, wool, or heavy linen blocked the drafts, trapped body heat, and muffled the snoring of whoever you were forced to share it with. Servants prepared the bed each night in elaborate rituals. They warmed sheets by the fire, shook out blankets to scare off insects, and sometimes placed heated stones wrapped in cloth between the layers. These were removed just before the noble arrived, leaving a fleeting pocket of warmth. Fleeting, but better than nothing. The nobility also had more bedding furs, embroidered quilts, silken pillows, and often wore finer nightclothes, including linen shirts scented with herbs like lavender or rosemary, to mask the smell of never having bathed. Some monarchs even had bedchamber rituals, attended by courtiers. In France, Louis XIV's nightly undressing was practically a state event. In England, kings and queens might sleep in separate privy chambers, guarded and carefully regulated. Privacy was rare, but prestige was not. Still, even royalty couldn't buy their way out of the cold. Castle design prioritized defense, not comfort. High towers were the coldest rooms. Windows still lacked glass, and no amount of fur could keep out the medieval chill entirely. Royal chamber pots froze solid overnight. Steam rose from your breath in the morning light, and you still had to pray the fire didn't go out. Noble or not, the night reminded everyone. The stone walls protect you from enemies, but nothing protects you from winter. Cold was constant. Noise was inevitable. Privacy was fiction. But the worst part of medieval sleep, what it did to your spirit. You didn't just sleep to rest. You slept to recover from grinding labor, aching limbs, and endless exposure, but the recovery rarely came. Your sleep was interrupted by pests, fear, prayers, or just the chill that crept in at 3 a.m. and settled in your marrow like regret. For peasants, days were built on exhaustion. Wake with the sun, break your back till dusk, return to a bed of straw and stone. No softness, no solitude, just layers of grime, shared blankets, and a rotating cast of snorers. It wasn't rest, it was collapse. For servants, sleep was conditional, permissioned by masters, dictated by bells. Sometimes they napped in shifts, curled in corners, or beside the hearth. A warm spot on the flagstones was a prize. A borrowed blanket was a treasure. They often rose before dawn to stoke fires, prepare meals, or empty chamber pots, all before they'd even had a chance to fully rest. Even the nobility weren't immune. Chronic insomnia plagued some royal courts. Anxiety, superstition, and the weight of political intrigue made peaceful sleep elusive. Letters and diaries from the period are full of sleepless nights, haunted dreams, and relentless fatigue. And mental toll aside, there was the physical decline. Lack of deep sleep weakened immune systems. Recurrent colds, skin infections, fevers, they all hit harder when the body couldn't heal overnight. Children suffered stunted growth. Women miscarried. The elderly faded fast, all from something as simple and essential as not being able to stay warm through the night. Sleep wasn't sanctuary. It was just another battleground in the daily war of survival. You didn't wake refreshed. You woke shivering, stiff, and vaguely resentful of the Sunday. In the medieval world, surviving the day was expected. Surviving the night? That was the quiet miracle. So, would you curl beneath layers of flea-bitten wool and straw, sharing body heat with siblings, strangers, and servants? Could you find rest with the wind slithering through the walls, your breath fogging in front of your face, your toes slowly numbing under thin sheets? Could you sleep knowing the fire's gone cold? The shadows are deep, and every creak might be vermin, or worse, a sickness carried on night air. Medieval sleep wasn't quiet, it wasn't solitary, it wasn't warm. It was a performance, a nightly strategy played out in stone boxes that protected your body from swords but offered no mercy from the cold. And still, they endured. generation after generation, drifting to sleep, in beds that bit back, wrapped in prayers, dreams, and sometimes frost. Today, we complain about lumpy pillows and subpar thread counts. We wrap ourselves in heated blankets and demand climate-controlled bedrooms. But centuries ago, rest was a privilege clawed out of discomfort, and even then, it came at a cost. Maybe you would have made it one night, maybe two, but an entire winter? Let us know in the comments if you think you'd have made it until spring.